give a lot, Hirschhorn says. I want to do that in order to challenge the other people, the viewers, to get equally involved, so that they also have to give. Bataille based his version of the potlatch on the theory of the gift from the French sociologist Marcel Mauss. The socialists most define the gift as the other of the commodity. Like the commodity for Marx, the gift for Mauss produces a confusion between things and persons. Things which are to some extent parts of persons, and persons and groups that behave in some measure as if they were things. Yet unlike commodity exchange, gift exchange sets up a pattern of symmetrical and reciprocal rights, a charged ambivalence between people that binds them together, not an abstract equivalence between products that separates them. And this kind of gift exchange is very common in the societies of indigenous peoples. It keeps them together through ambivalence, but it keeps them together. It's not like commodity exchange in which we are very separated consumers. To refuse to give or to fail to invite is like refusing to accept the equivalent of a declaration of war, Mauss writes. It is a refusal of friendship, refusal of community. Hirschhorn seeks to reanimate subject-object relations along the lines of gift exchange. He described one proposal for giant books that he wanted to put along the roadside, as here in his model, as an obscene gift. And this term, obscene gift, is a good rubric or title for much of his art. You ever see his installations? They're just obscene in their giving. Giving, affirming, is about demanding something of the public, Hirschhorn writes of this project. Rather than triggering participation of the audience, he says of another work, I want to implicate them. This is the exchange I propose. I'm the one, as artist, who has to give first, Hirschhorn comments about a third work. Participation can only be a lucky outcome, because I, the artist, have to do the work for the implication of the other. Rather than hope for participation then, Hirschhorn prepares it by presence and production, and then prompts it through implication. Like all acts of generosity, his projects are charged with ambivalence, mixing as they do the neighbor and the stranger. Yet this mixing is undertaken precisely so that a different sort of society might crystallize, if only for a moment. In the potlatch, prestige accrues to whoever can expend the most. And that accumulation of symbolic power can happen with artists too. It doesn't happen with Hirschhorn, I think, because he seeks that contradictory thing, an egalitarian potlatch. One man equals one man is another of his mottos. There's nothing more egalitarian than that saying. That is, if you include women and men. Okay, I'm almost done. The final concept, the fourth concept I want to underscore in Hirschhorn is emergency. And this is a condition that far exceeds Hirschhorn alone. Call it what you like, social contract or symbolic order. It is more tenuous than we think. Certainly the current order was precarious before 9/11. Prior to George Bush and Tony Blair, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher led the neoliberal charge with the battle cry, there is no such thing as society. This is a notorious statement of Thatcher, that we are just individuals with no responsibility for each other. It is also true that precarity became more pervasive in Western societies over the last decade. For all the discussion of failed states elsewhere, our own, and here I mean the United States and the United Kingdom, have come to operate routinely and destructively as rogues. And in this capacity, they threaten us all. It is little wonder that the concept of the state of exception, developed by the German jurist Carl Schmitt in the early 1920s, has returned with force. For Schmitt, who became a Nazi figure, the state of exception to the law that founds the law. Let me explain, if you don't know this literature. It's become very important for philosophers like Jacques Derrida and Giorgio Agamben. Basically, the argument here is that in the state of nature, there is no law. So every first moment of law is an act of violence that founds the law. It's an act of power that says, I make the law. So there's a conundrum here. Law is founded in violence. It's hard to think through, but this is the argument of this body of philosophy. Now this state of exception to the law that founds the law is not a primordial or prehistoric act lost in the mists of time. It recurs whenever a government declares a state of emergency and suspends its own judicial code. I'm sure you've experienced this in Colombia. I think we've experienced it in the United States, and we did under Bush. In fact, as foreseen by Walter Benjamin in Theses on the Philosophy of History, the last text he wrote before he committed suicide in 1940, this state threatens to be not the exception, but the rule. More recently, the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben has turned this foreboding into a principle. The Jews were exterminated not in a mad and giant Holocaust, Agamben writes, but exactly as Hitler had announced, as lice, which is to say, as bare life. Now, bare life is the phrase that Agamben uses for people who are simply under the force of power, who have nothing but that creaturely cringe under power. Agamben extends this principle to a judgment on post-war modernity at large. Bare life now approaches the norm, he argues, and the camp is the new biopolitical law of the planet. Now, famously, Agamben defines bare life as the life of Homo sacer, a sacred man who may be killed and yet not sacrificed. This goes back to Roman law, but this figure, the sacred man, is really just anyone who can be killed with impunity. This man is sacred in the antithetical sense of the word, mostly lost to us today. That is to say, he is a person at the mercy of everyone. Indeed, in the Roman social order, Homo sacer was the lowest of the low. Yet as such, he was also the complement of the highest of the high, the sovereign leader. This doubling of Homo sacer, sacred man, and sovereign power intrigues Agamben, just as the doubling of the beast and the sovereign intrigued Derrida in his last seminars before his death. The two terms in both pairs are opposites, the one lowly, the other supreme, the one beneath the law, the other above it. Yet they are also alike in this exteriority to the law, and they're often represented as such in the guise of each other. In European art, the prince was often represented as a wolf, and the beast was often represented as a king, most famously in the Leviathan of Thomas Hobbes, the English philosopher of political power. For Derrida as for Agamben, these pairs pose a riddle that points to how power is founded in a primordial connection of violence and law, that is, in the sheer violence of self-authorization. Now, I know this is difficult, but it's important to understand what the state of emergency is, because I think Hirschhorn wants to suggest in his work that more often than we know it, we live in such a state. Now, faced with a situation in which precarity seems the norm below and emergency the norm above, Hirschhorn often performs this doubling in his work. On the one hand, he crosses over into the precarious. On the other hand, he acts out his own state of emergency. More and more, the two terms, precarity and emergency, come together in his discourse. Precariousness is the dynamic, the emergency, and the necessity of my work. In 2003, when Hirschhorn assembled 37 books, greatly enlarged, for his emergency library, it was not for reading on vacation or on a desert island, but as an arsenal of absolute demands for here and now. When Hirschhorn cries, "Help me," he speaks to emergency, as he does when he avows, "I love you." I selected figures, and here he means, again, figures like Ingeborg Bachmann or Spinoza or Deleuze. I selected figures about whom I could really say, "I love you." Here's another one of his altars. About whom I really meant it. There was a real commitment. This expression of love is not only about an investment in obscure artists and authors, it is also a contract made in emergency and against emergency, with the commitment of a fan that doesn't require justification. It is an attempt to rescue artists and authors like Freundlich and Bachmann from oblivion, and to entreat them to take up arms with him in the present. The past can be seized only as an image which flashes up at the instant when it can be recognized. Hirschhorn writes, Benjamin writes in his theses on the philosophy of history, flashes up and is never seen again. It is in the same urgent time of the now that Hirschhorn also works. In this time, and in his work, commitment, political commitment, and artistic autonomy are not in contradiction. For the autonomy that interests Hirschhorn is not the self-sufficiency of art, but the autonomy of courage, the autonomy of assertion, the autonomy to authorize myself. Where do I stand? What do I want? This is essentially a map of his work, a map of his life. These are questions Hirschhorn means us to ask, too, about our own work and about our own lives. That's it.